What's up, guys? BBT Carter here. Got BBT Nick over here. We're finishing up this rig here. We got most of it completed. We want to take you guys through what it took to get some of these cards going. Working with AMD, you have to usually go through a couple different BIOSes for even the same card sometimes to get everything to work functionally. We want to take you guys through that process.
We're just trying to bring you guys with us.
Yes. Prizes. What? Exclusive to CES.
right.
What's up, guys? BBT Carter here. Got BBT Nick over here. We're finishing up this rig here. We got most of it completed. We want to take you guys through what it took to get some of these cards going. Working with AMD, you have to usually go through a couple different BIOSes for even the same card sometimes to get everything to work functionally. We want to take you guys through that process.
All right, folks. Hopefully you guys can all hear me loud and clear. Looks like it's going. Stream is rolling. We got about 36 in channel. We'll give it a few minutes. We'll get a few more folks in here, and then we're going to go through Hudson's letter to the community on behalf of the ProgPoW debate and kind of both sides of it, some history. It's actually a really good post. I actually enjoyed reading through it, kind of looking back through the history from the initial, question of it, the validity before the audits, the multiple times it's been accepted, and then kind of where we're at right now with some questions. And I think that this is really going to be posed for both sides of the argument, because there is, my opinion of it, we'll get towards the end, but my opinion of it is I understand where he's coming from, and I understand where a lot of the community members are at, and I think I'm going to actually talk very on their side through most of this, but I want to make sure that everybody understands where things sit in the stack, where the current proposal's at, because I think some people got some confusion thinking that Hudson, his position at the end of the proposal, saying that he is kind of against it and thinks it's dead. That's his opinion, and that there's still some discussions that need to go on with kind of what's next. If it's not going to be implemented, or if they're going to pull it off the table from accepted, what are the next steps? Because it's not as easy as just tossing it away. There was a lot of investment of time, money spent, and I think that it needs to at least have some kind of closure with, a future path, have it in the back door, have it as a back door just in case it needs to be used, that kind of thing. So with that much effort that's been put towards something, you just don't want to just throw it away. That's a lot of waste. So we're going to go through it. I'm going to bring up the letter. We'll go through it pretty quickly in the top. We'll go through some of the rebuttals that are discussed, and I'll talk to my perspective on some of those and try to provide some clarity from at least the participating mining side. The people that watch the videos, myself or Voscoin or any of the other channels that support cryptocurrency mining in general, for I would say the common person or anybody. Like, people don't have an understanding of scale of how many people interact and do mining. We're kind of classified all as the same kind of product. And, if people can recall even back to 2018 when I was doing a lot of live streams, and I would bring up stuff like on my cell phone when I was going through some apps, and you guys would laugh at me for having, 115,000 unread messages on BitsBeTrippin.gmail.com, and to understand that, there was a handful of ICOs being shilled and stuff there. A lot of that was user community, 115,000 emails, of which were just people asking for help, asking questions about mining rigs, asking some clarity because they're about to use a BIOS update for an AMD card. I, being in the position of, having a YouTube channel in this space since 2013, have had a lot of interaction with the miners at home, or even some of the larger shops that have 10, 12, 15 rigs. So my perspective when I'm talking about the mining community is a different, looking through a different lens because of the interaction that I have with you guys. And that's why I love doing these live, the interaction that I get from the chat and from you guys talking. It gives me some level of presence of, a lot of people could be just in there trolling or saying, hey, I mine and do whatever. But like, people send me pictures, they send me their rigs, they send me their constant types of builds. That's the huge community that I'm talking to when I'm talking about mining community and being able to participate. I wanted to make sure that up front, when I start talking about the miners and going through Hudson's posts, this is the group that I'm talking to. I'm talking about the guy that's put one rig together, has scrounged up a few different cards, have a couple cards and put something together. That's the community, and that's the dispersity throughout the entire world. I've had people from all walks of life, all different kinds of countries reach out to us. I know Voscoin and some of the other groups, Red Panda Mining, other folks have people all over, Europe, North Africa, South Africa, everywhere really that reach out and ask questions about how to participate in mining, because it's a great equalizer. My 160 mega hash here is the same 160 mega hash anywhere in any other country, and that same output to that same pool is going to give you the same results. That's some of the enticement of being part of that mining scene, and people just don't comprehend that money works a little differently in different areas depending on exchange rates and stuff. So it's a huge equalizer. Why it might not be a lot for somebody in the US or the UK, somebody in a country that's exchange rates are a little different and have hyperinflations, the money actually goes further. Bitcoin sometimes is priced way higher, you know, so if they convert from one coin to a Bitcoin, or they come from Bitcoin to another coin, the exchange rates are different. So perspective means everything in these kind of discussions. So let's get into, I think we have a pretty good, it's about 58. I would say that's a good enough quorum to kind of get started into this, and I'll go through Hudson's kind of posts, kind of give it the once over, and then we'll get into it. So let's get you guys switch over to that, which is the screen that I'm on right now. Now this is the post that I'm talking about, and I'll have this included in the description below if you guys had not been tracking, seen it on Twitter. But Hudson Jameson is, for all intents and purposes, if you're a developer world, he's kind of like the scrum master in the space when it comes to the protocol development, core EIP adjudication, as it were, with Ethereum. It's been that way for quite a long time. And so he has a lot of exposure to how this process works and things that kind of come through this process. And this is being as contentious as it's been, you know, had a pretty good, not just recollection, but, you know, a good level of due diligence to capture all the history of the situation, because some people coming in late don't get to see, you know, all the proof points that have been covered over a period of time. So this is kind of a collection of all those proof points, and then he puts an opinion of his based on that experience on where to go and why. So the first part of this, Prog Proof of Work, the Ethereum community speaks. That first part, that first paragraph right here, just explains what it is. It's a programmatic proof of work. It's been a topic of contention in the Ethereum community for a long time. The basis of this post is, you know, it's giving you the history, like I've said, and where it came from, type of stuff. So Prog Proof of Work, if anybody that hasn't been tracking, proof of work algorithm. Now, it was aimed to replace eTash. It was born out of the attempt to hold to an ASIC resistant, or, you know, an ASIC deterrent algorithm. That's where it was born out of. Now, that doesn't mean nobody else, or you have to be on eTash. I've had this question come to me. People are, well, does it make sense to use this on some other crypto, and do we have to start from eTash? No. This is an outright replacement that will have some features like the DAG file and stuff built into it, but you could technically integrate the DAG, this algorithm into another coin too. But so just to get that clarified. It aims to decrease the economic incentive to build an ASIC, highly specialized devices designed for specific purposes. That's the point of an ASIC, and more efficient than traditional GPU mining. ProgPoW is not designed to compete with a ProgPoW ASIC from being created, but rather be expensive to build. So that's a key point that I want to make sure that everybody's aware of, because I've seen the side of both. You know, both sides kind of argue this point. Bottom line, you can build an ASIC for anything. It's all about time and money. If Ethereum's market cap went to $500 billion and it's $2,000, the economic incentive is there to do whatever you can to get an advantage on those every 15 seconds to Ethereum. It's about $2.3 million a day at current prices of inflation into the system from the mining. So if you're trying to understand why people still mine, or there's like people that just drop in the stream and go, really, GPU mining is still a thing, or ASIC mining is still a thing? Like, is anybody really mining? Yes, people are mining because to uphold a blockchain that's the market cap size of Ethereum versus its price, there's, you know, not just money to be made, but there's a huge amount of security and dollars wrapped up into it that makes it to where a lot of people are going to interact with it. They see that market cap size, they start investigating, like, hey, can I mine this or not? How can I? And they try to get at that inflation rate, right? So 2 coins every 15 seconds, notionally it's 13.9 to 15 seconds every block, 2 coins introduced into the system, right? So there's a lot of potential revenue there for somebody to take advantage of. Bottom line, that price goes way up. There's a huge economic incentive to build whatever's there. The basis of this ProgPoW algorithm was designed to try to be as tightly coupled to a GPU and the architecture within a GPU as possible. 2 years ago when it was introduced, and you'll see that in Hudson's post here, that was a lot of speculation. A lot of people try to punch holes through that, and that's really what we're going to get into right now in the next part of Hudson's depiction here, where it shows the folks that were involved in it, really 3 developers that have spoken on the design and developed ProgPoW, with Christy Mineham being the really public visual of that, and talking through the specifics of the algorithm itself. Now, obviously, a lot of speculation very early. If this was, was this being funded by NVIDIA? Was this being funded by, the GPU makers? Was there some other kind of, secret sauce that could be exploited in this? This was a lot of the early context you'll see in some of the stuff that Hudson brings up down here at the bottom. And what it came down to is it put enough scrutiny to get this algorithm, a technical third party to really break that down. We'll bring up those white papers that were created that did the technical merit of it here in a minute, but really it came down to try to understand, with that incentive, did somebody just try to backdoor this to have some kind of better deal or not? So there was a lot of those things answered in this the last 2 years here. So the EIP process, he gets into, I'm going to jump back into the EIP process here. So for people that aren't tracking EIP process, the Ethereum improvement plan, this is the same thing as Bitcoin, where it comes from an improvement plan, BIP. This is an EIP, which is Ethereum. It is a design document to provide information to the Ethereum community describing feature for Ethereum or its predecessor environment. In a developer world, this is like the backlog for protocol and interface side. So this is just a common backlog that people can kind of get around. I would say EIPs are really more at the epic level, which is a very high level, and then you have some of your technical documentation that gets put into the EIP, such as the source code, and then the ability to be able to go through that information. So it's really just a centralization of the content that's going into an upgrade, that to get everybody on the same page. So that's what the EIP process is. Those core items, the ones that have to do with consensus or a change of the core algorithm, and this can go for any really cryptocurrency, but for the Ethereum process, those are considered core EIPs, things that are going to change the main core of the algorithm, the main core of some of the feature sets, like adding new features like opcodes or some calculation steps in there. And those require usually hard forks, meaning there's been this bad mantra put on like a coin doing a hard fork, because everybody always associates that with either a contention or a chain split. Hard forks are normal things. It's just meaning the base algorithm or the base layer of the blockchain itself of the cryptocurrency is changing, and then everybody has to get on the same page to accept those changes. And that way the chain, when it's going, it will, it won't fork, it'll just move to the right, and it still becomes the longest chain. It's just with new features. So it's kind of like a moment in time across the timeline, and you have a change here, and then that timeline just keeps going with just new features added after a certain point. Those are hard forks. Soft forks are backwards compatible and don't require a huge, massive change for everybody to flag for. Soft forks could be something people don't use. If they have a wallet and it's just a soft fork, it may be just like variable changes on something that already exists out there. So I'm just giving you some context of what these differences are, because it'll play into when I start to explain where contention comes in and why somebody would fear that this would split if everybody just agreed with the same fork, right? So I'm trying to give you guys some context into this. Based on just general feedback that I get from some of the videos where people are like, cool story, bro, but I still don't know what you're saying. So if you guys hear me kind of mansplaining a little bit on this, that's where I'm going with it. So that's the EIP process. Hudson kind of gives you some background of where he sits in that stack, and then really who it's moving over to when it comes to hard fork coordinator, which is James Hancock. Now, the hard fork coordinator job why that's so important is it's part of it's like, hey, we're going to move forward with this, and then I got to notify people, right? This is going to production. People have to know not only the nodes and the miner's going to accept this. If you are now hooked to oracles, you're hooked to anything else that has a dependency on it, that you want to make sure you're in check. Your client is hooked up, everything's good to go. So folks will be working on testnet on those forks to ensure their stuff's good to go. So a hardware fork coordinator is also a communicator to ensure that everybody, you know, it's hard to herd, mind you, the area where a lot of these meetings take place around ProgPoW is around the cat herders. It's kind of a rolling joke to make sure that everybody's on the same page, right? It's trying to like herd cats when you have a big change to a huge participant of audience. So part of that job is to ensure that people know where to go, and then it's their responsibility to be looking at that, saying, hey, every 2 weeks we meet, and every 2 weeks some content's gonna come out, and it's either gonna motion forward or not, right? And if that thing motions forward, everybody should be on the same page. So I've kind of taken that strike back to Vitalik when he came in and said, hey, who Ninja approved this? Hey bro, they meet every 2 weeks and this came up. Right, so part of that messaging and communication is understanding that of that role is to ensure that the communication is kind of in the same area and that everybody knows to go get it and be consumers of that. So that's the point of the hard fork role. Part of that's also part and parcel of trying to make sure that things can move ahead. So that role right now is being held by James Hancock there. So we get into the next part where it's ProgPoW and the Ethereum core development meeting. So this is a good just historical account if anybody wanted to go back and had some time, was trying to kill some time and wanted to go through some of these. There's 13 meetings where ProgPoW was mentioned. So from initial introductions, I think a follow-up meeting after that had actual ProgPoW participants on there. And then some of just the discovery history, and then even some of these later on, especially in 2019, when I started sitting there searching, there was a lot of organization being done to move forward with this. It was an integration of ProgPoW and the clients. There were talk about taking down test nets and updating test nets to ensure that there would be a seamlessness when it came to what block it would go live on, and then making sure that proper testing was done to say, you know, we've done testing here, but this has been a year, so let's do some more testing, right? So the general narrative for this was not a technical confusion of like, should we do this or not? It was clear and present that it was moving forward, and that it was just more of the due diligence of making sure, did the audit happen and do we have that confidence? And how do we make sure everybody's aligned and are all the clients in good shape, and does everybody know what's going on? That was really the kind of end of 2019 into the beginning of the mid 2019 into getting the audits back, right? Because it was really kind of just that checkpoint. Do the audits check out? Can we disseminate that information, make sure everybody's comfortable with it, and then move on? That's really where that the context of proposing this timeline was. You know, this was, I think, ProgPoW as a bargaining chip to miners. So I'll read this piece here. So back when the initial deciding was happening with Ethereum at the end of 2018, ProgPoW was brought up often, some considering a bargain chip for miners to accept the issuance reduction. Some miners still believe that it was agreed upon. I do not remember this conversation. So I remember that there was some talk that I looked at what they're talking about is when Ethereum went 5 coins to 3 coins, and then there was another discussion about taking it from 3 to 2 on the issuance every block. So every 15 seconds it would issue less Ethereum. So it's a deflationary kind of curve on the infinite supply that Ethereum is, right? So you would have less inflation per year because really it's how much do we pay for security kind of concept. And I know that there was some discussions where miners were like, hey, if we're going to be able to participate, reduce. I don't look at those as combined. I don't think I've ever communicated that to the community. I'm trying to remember I was very heavy on live stream about every 2 days around that time, and it was more of testing ProgPoW to check its validity than that it was automatically accepted if we accepted a mining reduction. So I think you're safe on that one. I think there's a few people out there that may have misinterpreted that, but I don't think that there was ever an acceptance like, hey, you do this and we'll take this. Part of my counter argument into this entire situation's been the fear that there was going to be contention, like a contentious split from the miner side. And my whole take back on that was, if there was a contentious split, or if there was any moment in time in the Ethereum ecosystem where miners were going to rebel, there's been 2 assurance reductions in Ethereum, right? And that is probably the most contentious, if you think, because you're taking what miners earn over a period of time and it's reducing. So naturally, it's like a Bitcoin supply reduction, and Ethereum really hadn't responded to that supply reduction, right? So the price just did what it did. It was not correlated in any way. So essentially, instead of more people mining, less people mine, and then it becomes back into that equilibrium that I'm talking about. So I don't think that miners would be rebellious either way on if ProgPoW was there or if it wasn't, to be honest with you. It's just because that's not as big as of an impact as issuance reductions is what it comes down to at the end of the day. Unless the entire network was taken over by ASICs and FPGAs and miners couldn't participate, which they can still right now. So ProgPoW accepted. So we're down at the piece here. EIP states that it was an accepted state. This was sometime before 2018 when it was accepted, but then it had a follow-up saying, well, cool story, but we still need a pending audit. Accepted pending the audit, because there was still some not very much confidence in it technically. There was a huge lobby support from some of the ASIC manufacturers saying that this is a move to disenfranchise us. We have some costs and investments, and you're going to accept this without an audit. So they pushed forward, had an audit. I'll speak to this. I was not going to read all of this to you guys, just reading. You guys can read through this. I'm just ascertaining kind of what a lot of this says, but you know, the clear and point of this one is that there was the first kind of acceptance, but it did have a caveat about a audit. Meeting later, the community and the Ethereum cat herders conducted its third-party audit. Miners should voted to. He said their miners should start. So I think he copied essentially the meeting notes there. So what it was is miners actually did a vote signal on the extra data field, and then, which I call kind of a moot point, to be honest with you. Just there's a whole thing in voting, and it comes to blockchains that need to be talked to in a whole separate video. But bottom line, it was 100% miners were okay with it at that time. Which, mind you, there wasn't a huge amount of proliferation at that point in time with the E3 just yet. So it would have been a lot of GPU miners flagging to their particular pools, and the pools saying, yes, we want to continue to have GPU miners there. There was skepticism from the core developers that the audit would not quell the concerns from the community and that it would remain a controversial EIP. I mean, the way this was introduced to the community, I think what really puts it on one leg back. The being very kind of cloak and dagger on, you know, who contributed to the code, and the introduction and the initial set really kind of put it on, you know, like, I don't know, I don't even know who this is. But I want to put this in context. It was more of theater than it would have been like any other proposals out there. Meaning somebody comes up with random X, it's out on a GitHub, everybody looks at it, tests it, and say, hey, this looks like this is good. Nobody knows exactly who wrote or contributed to a lot of that. It's not even come into discussion because it's on an open source forum people can poke holes through. ProgPoW's been on an open source forum, and it's had literally funded professional audits that have went through it, and we're about to bring those up here. So from a contextual, is this a piece of technology and what's it do standpoint, the fact of how it was introduced will always sit wrong with a handful of people for sure. But when it comes down to the technical merit of using something or not, I mean, the code is the code, right? And that's where my faith in where it's at sits, is through those professional audits, through this due diligence that's been done on this. Comparable to any other cryptocurrency that's out there that's ever had, you know, this level of an audit, short of probably Bitcoin and SHA-256 from just all the reporting that's came around that from people trying to participate in that. It has a lot of due diligence that was really forced to prove it, which almost makes sense. This is the second largest cryptocurrency blockchain on the planet. So it should have this level of scrutiny. It should have this level of, you know, where you're not going to solve everybody's, you know, risk profile with it, but it comes down to what is the best that you can do and given in that circumstance. And I think that's where it sets at. So let's get back into pulling this down here. So the cat herders go to work. They commission the audit. More details around the settlement are located in this Medium article. So if you want to talk through some of the risk and some of the hardware claims by their manufacturers of saying this is where my risk and my issues are with it, Medium article was pushed there. You'll get through the settlement collection, which is really kind of the coin votes, where you had 2.9 million yes to 184,000 no. Overwhelming favor of ProgPoW. You guys can read through all that. ProgPoW software and the audits. So here comes down to the audits released in September of 2019. The delay in the audits released primarily due to the funding rate, you know, because there was funding that, again, this is paid for content. Least Authority is a well-known security consulting group in the cryptocurrency space, performed the software audit, and the hardware audit was performed by Bob Rao, distinguished former Intel responsible for directing development of advanced analytical tools and methods for microprocessor performance, characterization, silicon debugging, and yield enhancement. Links to the audits are here, which I think is going to take us off here. We'll back this up. Here are the two audits. So we're not going to go through these. I'm just going to click them and fire them up. We'll go in through Bob Rose. I'll scroll through this very quickly because people probably haven't even opened these before. Bottom line, very normal statement of work style delivery where you have your outline, your executive summary of what the situation is, the expectations of the audit, executive summary on those expectations, the strategy for eTash and ProgPoW, which gets into some of the details on there, the ASIC strategy, if somebody was to try to build an ASIC, ASIC strategy to try to mitigate some of the hardness of the memory pieces, memory hardness layers, you know, different approaches and costs. So bottom line, lots of context of like if all things being equal and development and time and money was a thing, here's the transistor density, here's the wafer cost, here's what it's going to cost for us to figure out to build an ASIC that would be, you know, relative to it, and then what was the total advantage. And at the end of the day, when you go through this and you look through the output of this, you're talking a very minimal increase. And I'll get right to the conclusion. The ProgPoW algorithm works well enough to mitigate the conventional ASIC strategies. Here is really that's the current eTash enhancements, and we're looking at 2.5 times the current one on the current eTash algorithm. And then he acknowledges an issue with the light evaluation method, which is one of the known exploits now that you can use. And then here's the kind of the DAG growth. Here's your DAG growth chart, boys. 8 gig in 2024. 6 gig goes out about midway, about 2022. And then least authorities, real quick, just scroll down. I mean, it's a lot of text, and it talks on the software side, some of the background and history, and your differences on your speeds and rates versus other potential vulnerabilities. But bottom line, we got to go back from this. The audits kind of came through and essentially blessed the fact that this is one of the more hardened algorithms against ASICs, or the least incentive algorithm out there to create more ASICs that they've evaluated. And I don't know if they've evaluated RandomX to kind of compare it. I don't think they did a cost comparison there. But post-audit decisions from the core developers, further down this list, when it was brought back up. At this time, it was in response to questions of the EFI, which is eligible for inclusion or not. EFI is a state where the core EIP is decided to be a good idea and then given the go-ahead by developers, investigation codes, and funding. The reason for attacking this process gets into to get strong from there. So he talks to it. I don't think he actually gave the output of if it was an okay to go ahead. But in the most recent discussion on Core Dev Meeting 81, which was on February 21st, which is start this kind of fury on ProgPoW, was started here on the 21st on when it would be, introduced. You guys can go through that. And the long story short, it's why we're here having discussions on if it's going to be included or not, and what the next steps are. Now, pros and cons, and the way this is kind of worded is it's a statement and then a rebuttal, right? So he's went through this and talked through the reason why Ethereum was designed to be ASIC resistant, according to the white paper and yellow paper. This is, I'll save my piece on each of these, but although ASIC resistance was the original goal of Ethereum, times have changed and it's very difficult to prevent anti-competitive economies of scale forming around mining. So my argument with this part here, Hudson, quite frankly, is there's an ethos, a direction that's stated when something's created. And yes, something could change, but that's where an addendum to the original white paper to say, hey, this is a thing, and from this point on, we're not going to adhere to that. So there's a method to doing that to make sure everybody's on the same page. So if the consensus of the community was we're not going to, this is not something that we think now that we're further along in the system and then we're further along in discovery, that this is no longer a an ethos to the space, then that should be an adjustment to an original. Like, this is, hey, here's an addendum here where we're probably not going to do that. That would be more the kind of proper way. I think that should be through some kind of voting mechanism. And then it's kind of like, hey, man, we updated the terms of service, because people are making financial decisions predicated on that. People are in part of this ecosystem because of it. Yes, it has extended, but it should be revised to do that. Just saying, I think it's less controversial. Let's go with the line of least resistance is a little risky there. And we've seen the harm that huge centralization has on any process, right? So point at any big issues on splits when it comes to Bitcoin and the Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, attacks, when there's a centralization of anything. I could probably talk a whole day on the Tron situation with Steemit. There's a lot of discoveries that are going to come out of this when it comes to conglomerates having control, right? And that is kind of the counter argument to having a multiple, something that levels the playing field for everybody. The next one on this is ProgPoW improves Ethereum's decentralization because commodity GPUs from individuals have a chance to mine rather than a few corporations. It effectively decentralizes hash rate. I don't think the opportunity to participate's there. Large corporations can still buy a lot of GPUs, and a lot do, and still participate in it. So it's kind of an idiocy there. The difference is, and I'm going to explain this. I'll talk to his rebuttal real quick. This argument assumes that ASICs will not be sold to the average person, which disproves the evidence. All right, I've already read enough on there. You cannot at scale buy ASICs, period. They're super limited. They usually sell it right away, and most of the bulk stock goes to those larger companies. So it is a falsehood to say that just anybody can go buy one, because right now I can walk to a store, I'm within almost walking distance to a store, and I can buy a participating GPU, period. End of story. There's no question there. So there is no comparison when you're talking to an ASIC. Most people around this planet cannot just go out and buy an ASIC. Some will have import charges, some will have issues even trying to get them, and most cannot do that. And then most buy them in earnest, meaning you have this huge, like really shitty situation where you buy one and then you don't get it for several months because the supply chain doesn't have the rapidity and there's the force projection that most supply chains have. So comparing the two are just no. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. There are a few that can get some, and even for like channels like us, like I've tried to go out and get an A10 and Ocelin to do some testing with it to see if it actually hits 485 mega hash at 850 watts, and then look to see how much memory it has on it. It cannot find one. It's impossible, right? So it's, somebody linked me to one. Would love to take a look at it. It's just, that argument is dead on arrival. So that's not a thing. So to compare the two. Now, if they were available, there was a chance at some point that if mining had the scale of purchasing that was going on at the time in 2017 through 2018, to where at a retail store level, there was considerations about buying mining edition GPUs and that they would be at a retail level because they can handle that force projection into the retail submarket right now. So ASICs are just not there, and their efficiency is so much higher usually that if they did build to scale where you'd have 7 million GPUs, if you had 7 million ASICs, they just wouldn't be profitable anymore. I mean, they do it to a certain scale, and then that's why their batch numbers are so limited. I mean, they could print off a lot, but they don't want to be setting on them too, because they are boat anchors if they're not viable anymore. That's part of the other issue. If we get into the mining community made up largely of individual miners, hobbyists have supported Ethereum since the beginning, and their wishes indicate the miner vote should be respected. Now, this is one that I'm not going to go against my community, the constituents of that community of GPU miners. Bottom line, Ethereum and the core development teams and all the dApp developers do not owe the miners anything. You're going to hear it from me saying very first, and it's going to probably piss off a lot of GPU miners. Nobody owes the miners anything. Nobody owns the miners on any concept of any blockchain in general. The incentive is built in. If you build it, they will come type of event. And yes, it could be used as a counter argument to ASICs and stuff, but we've talked about the issues with centralization of hash power. The reward system that's built in self-regulates to the equilibrium. So when you have times of very flat prices, people will mine up to the point to where they're almost very profitable. And then when you do a hedge across the entire space and look at what the average kilowatt per hour is, it usually lands around 4 to 6 cents per kilowatt if price has been flat for a while. And that's who's still mining. And then people drop off because they're not profitable. And you have this natural equilibrium that starts to occur, right? To where it's a race to the bottom when it comes to price, on the price per kilowatt, and it's just a self-regulating system. Not necessarily directly correlated to, honestly, with anything that anybody else is doing in the space, because the transaction volume isn't there yet to facilitate the transaction fees that really come into mix there. It's purely predicated on the incentive mechanism that's built into whatever respective blockchain, and then its output versus its current price. And mining self-regulates around that, period, end of story. So when people start messing with the dials, changing incentives and that sort of thing, that it does have fluctuations, and you're directly impacting, agnostic to who's mining, that entire system. So again, it's a self-regulation system. The development and all that wants a stable network, right? That's about making sure the right opcodes are in there, the right features and benefits are there, and you guys work on protocol things that help enhance the tool set for the people and developers. But again, the mining side, decorrelated. So again, a change for an algorithm such as ProgPoW, I hear the argument of like, oh, this is doing a solid for the miners. At the end of the day, you're doing a solid for ability to participate. Like, get it out of your mind that it's just about GPU miners. It's about having your algorithm or the ecosystem that you're supporting with the ability to have the distribution. Because in times of exponential growth, speculative rise, you have a rolling wave of people that want to jump in and participate. So if we look at the Bitcoin halving coming up, and we see a sea rises all boats, and you see this massive attention span go back to cryptocurrency, and you have this massive growth potential in the space. where a lot of people start to participate, just like in early or late 2017 to early 2018, you're going to have a huge community that's going to want to try to participate in that. And if everything's on ASICs and FPGAs, you're going to miss an entire ecosystem of people that are going to be communicating and configuring and having this entire secondary market that is built around the ability to participate in that space. And not just about mining and getting profit, but getting wallets and trying out new features of the dApps and the stuff that you guys create. There's been no association, an argument for the association that mining and the participation of mining, where if we're talking 7 million GPUs, those are not just sitting in one warehouse. Those are spread out across every country in this world. And if you have that degrees of separation from people having those conversations with people of getting into part of mining, or they come down and they say, hey, what's that machine? And then you have that conversation, oh, it's cryptocurrency. Oh yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, I mine that, and here's what it means. And they're downloading the My Crypto wallet and whatever else. You have this huge layer of organic growth from the participation ability of mining. So when I see the comments that, oh, it's just helping GPU miners, it's like there's a blind fact of the ability to participate has a direct correlation to the people using the other ancillary apps that are on the network. And that's part of the problem. So it isn't just a benefit to miners, its ability to participate, and it needs to be put in that context because that's the reality of the situation. And if you're confused on that, I will happily send you 115,000 emails over the last 7 years of people asking questions about it. And 4.5 million views on how to mine and the channel stuff that I have just on my channel, not to mention the other channels that do GPU mining that are close to 50 million views. I don't see any project in this space that has that kind of audience. And that's where it comes down to. That's why we're so vocal about this stuff. Come back down to, if ASICs proliferate the network, especially if it's 1 to 2 entities, can they perform attacks such as double spend? They have this incentive because of the move to proof of stake. I think this is kind of a moot issue. I do not think anybody that has a sunk cost and investment, be it GPU or ASICs, especially ASICs, that would attack a network directly to try to prevent something from happening. Now, there are malicious actors and there are people that have investments that don't think for a greater whole. But to directly attack the network and to switching over to ETH 2.0, like, not to be wrapped up in this particular piece. I don't think the double spin stuff usually comes from 1 or 2 people that can have a forced projection of rented mining hash power and then try to project it on a network that's vulnerable and then try to exercise a quick sell, pump and dump sell scheme where ASICs that sell mining hash power has the same. You don't really gain an advantage from like a nice hashable type of world where GPU miners will point to a third-party proxy that allows people to bid and buy their hash power and then repoint it to their, the focus that they want, and then technically they can take that hash power and try to attack a network. But technically, if you have a whole bunch of ASICs, they are nice hashable too. You're selling that same kind of problem. It's kind of a moot point. The difficult bomb makes it difficult for any miner to move to POS. I mean, so the difficult bomb is still in. You guys just moved it. I think it's a moot point. It works both ways for GPU and ASIC providers. Identities of the top GPU mining pools are known. The ASIC proliferation of the network will push GPU mining pools out because it was unprofitable for 1 to 2 ASIC entities and most of the network. If secretive ASIC development, we would not be able to hold accountable the entity. So I mean, this is a fact. That's an actual fact. There is no real rebuttal to this. If you look no further than right now, Ravencoin's network. If you look out there, 67% of the entire network is unknown. It's just people mining and broadcasting, and you have a handful of pools, which are pool operators, where people that have mining rigs point to a pool. When you have a disproportionate unknown size, especially that's over 51%, that's scary stuff. So that's what it comes down to. There's a fact there. If you have a huge competitive advantage, there's no reason for you to pay the 1 to 2% fees at a pool when you could create your own pool. And if you're rolling deep that far, you're more than likely mining for yourself at that point. You're not mining to a pool or F2 pool or Ethermine or any of that. You're mining for yourself. You're solo mining, proxy through your own pool that's not broadcasting who you are. It's an IP. There is no DNS entry on who you are, right? So the incentive, if you have a level of centralization, is to separate some of that. Now, because of the scale of stuff like Bitcoin and stuff, there is a kind of a threshold equivalent to where those entities will start to become known, especially if they start dumping with a KYC. If you're trying to do some level of liquidity, more than likely somebody would emerge as like, hey, I gotta sell a lot of crypto, so I can't stay super quiet. So it's kind of a thing. So like Ravencoin right now, not a huge lot of liquidity. Not a lot of people know who the 67 percentile is. They're more than likely they're converting it over to Bitcoin anyways, and then reselling that somewhere else. But it comes down to all about market liquidity and what the size of that capital is, and if they become known or not. That's why a lot of those Bitcoin pools are known, right? Because it's just part of being clear and present of what and who's there. Memory hard ASICs are able to perform light. So this lighthouse, the light evaluation mining attack is a known exploit. There's going to be some technical discussions, I think, that are coming out from Girl on that. I know that they've been doing some telemetry on scanning essentially the inference of the blockchain and the different block headers and looking at what looks like ASIC or FPGA activity versus a common GPU activity. Again, you know, I think it's going to be a requirement for a technical review to see if this is still, you know, that it's an issue, if somebody's really taking advantage of that. Bottom line, I don't think it's as clear and cut and dry to detect if that event is occurring or not. PM6, the current GPU mining pools are supportive of ETH 2.0 transition and will not attack the network. This is shown by Sparkpool has done for the Ethereum community and work in ETH 2.0. If there's unaccounted risk for A6 of secret large mining of hash power, we're at risk. See the rebuttal on PM4. I don't think there's anybody out there actively with the concept that they're gonna attack Ethereum's network. I think by and large, most of the community has been grateful that they've been able to mine Ethereum for this entire time, including the nice 2 to 3 year extension, waiting for Ethereum 2.0 to shake out. And still believe firmly that it's going to be probably realistically a couple more years of ETH 1.0, even if 2.0 is spun up when you have kind of a merger of the two. So bottom line, I think they're still pretty clear and present that there's going to be mining for a while, and I don't think anybody's really having the discussion on transition just yet. I think it still should be talked about. I think people should be on the same page, and then make sure, I think the part of that's also education and making sure that people understand things, where things set in the stack there. Let's see here. ASICs are very specialized hardware, which means they are subject to licensing, export controls, regulatory hassles by authoritarian governments who seek to control the mining community or censor transactions of the network. I mean, this is kind of like the 1%, 2% issue. I mean, yes, technically a pool could censor specific addresses if they wanted to, and any blocks that they mine, if those addresses are included or not. I mean, this is an issue on any blockchain if somebody wants to try to handle that, if they have their percentage. I don't think any of that behavior is being done. I think F2, there was some question if F2 pool was doing that or not, but I mean, I haven't really dug into if that's been an issue on Ethereum. I do not think that that is really a high concern right now. ProgPoW was not controversial when it was introduced. Controversy was directly correlated with certain parties such as Christie and IFTFLs and the algorithm itself. This is not open a threat vector. Can you create enough FUD to propose a rejection? There have been always questions about ProgPoW. The governance captures the work both ways. I think it's a moot point. I think I get that people may have not had good experiences with Christie and just genuine. I mean, sometimes people just don't like each other. I think there's obviously some baggage with regards to the situation with Minority and the FPGA GPU assist stuff that went down with Minority that still kind of hold maybe a rain cloud over that entire situation. I have some Squirrel components that were picked up and purchased here. They don't, I mean, they're just sitting and there's really nothing to be used with them, right? It was kind of part and parcel of my experience in general at FPGA territory and ASICs, that if you don't write your own bit streams or have a direct correlation to somebody that does, then you shouldn't be in that space, because you're reliant heavily on somebody's word or somebody else doing something. So even if the situation was somebody was promised something and then somebody was the front person of that and then those people didn't deliver, everybody's going to have to try to save face. I personally, I mean, that situation in general did not bode well for me and did not bode well for a lot of people that got into that space. And I think that's part of the risk with getting into any kind of hardware architecture stuff in this space. So I'm going to go back and circle right back to when I'm talking with you guys and I'm talking about EVGA and ASUS and participating in mining and open source miners and stuff. Now you can see why I really stick to that space. In 2014, I did a handful of ASICs. And it went through, I guess, that evolution of just ASICs not delivering, getting late, you know, KNC miners, a lot of Avalon, Butterfly Labs. I mean, I can't tell you how many failed pieces of honka junks I have that just didn't work out, right? Until really Bitmain came around and was a little more consistent on the supply chain side, but then all kinds of issues when it comes politically and other issues with Bitmain early, and now you have just more of a kind of a step back and drop in hardware. But you know, it's just part and parcel with a growing industry and those issues. So does this have anything to do with ProgPoW? As far as I'm considered, no. Since it's been through all the audits that have been there. So, and the testing that I've done for hours and hundreds of hours on this in front of you guys. So I have a lot more confidence in ProgPoW and what it can do. So no, for me, from the GPU side, it doesn't. And to other people, you know, I got to respect their opinions of it, and especially if they got burned hard on it, I understand where they're coming from. Technical, the hardware and software audits both concluded that it was significant improvement over to these ETH implementation. There were a few things pointed out, and here's the rebuttal. The few things pointed out, the audits, including Lighthouse migration reference from both audits. The audit also concluded that ProgPoW would remove ASICs from the network, advances in hardware. Yep, we'll get through that. I'm gonna kind of speed this up so I can get to my conclusion points because we're almost at an hour and I don't want to waste a lot of your guys' time here. I think we've went through most of this too. Light evaluation mining attack reference both audits needed to address. A large amount of increased efficiency would have to be this. If a decision is made, somehow concerned about if other miners and algorithms should be more friendly or less friendly, then I don't think this is going to happen. You guys just spent a lot of money and time in 2 years to go through this ProgPoW audit. I would say it would be a complete waste of time to spend that level of due diligence on the next thing to try to break something that has already been technically merited. ProgPoW has been tested on the Gangnam testnet and is safe to use on the network. Significant risk. We need to redo this anyways. So part of my rebuttal on that is that I believe 0.93 would need to be retested on a testnet with enough participation in there to give some more confidence on it technically before we go live anyways. Motivation, the community has been ignored in the past as well as today in discussing the ProgPoW. It was stealthily, maliciously, or not pushed through the core dev meetings. It was not, bros. It was. You guys were transparent. I don't know why you're trying to save face on here. It was part of 13 development meetings. There's a lot of folks that are TLDRs and will not read into things and then just go, oh, what? Something's changing? You have a responsibility if you develop on a platform to be part of those meetings. This is no different in the development world when you have your IPT meetings, your integrated product team testing meetings, when you have a product development and you have an infrastructure side. If the infrastructure guys are changing endpoints, service registries, whatever, APIs changes, whatever, it's all about communication. I don't care if you're in whatever development, game developer, product developer, cloud infrastructure developer, doesn't matter. It's all about communication. And everybody participating in this space should understand what's being proposed when it comes to a protocol level. That is everybody's responsibility. You cannot point to a core dev meeting, which is mostly a group of folks that are volunteers trying to cat herd this entire space. So I put my hats off to the ETH core developers for just adjudicating those meetings, trying to put out the meeting notes. They've given you guys all kinds of sources to be able to reflect to. It is your responsibility. If you have somebody on your team in this development ecosystem that is not tracking, you should assign somebody. It's 5 minutes to go through and get the Cliff Notes version of what some of these protocol meetings that are under the issue here. So part of this is a communication issue where people don't understand that certain things have passed gates and they're where they're at. That's why I've always liked adopting kind of a DMETI world where you have define, measure, development, and implement, right? You have your kind of toll gates that you get through, and then you can develop and implement. Everybody on the same page, right? So it is a self-responsibility for some of these teams that are developing. So 13 meetings, 2 acceptances, everything's been passed, and people are still complaining. There is an onus on the community to participate in this. That's all I'm saying. I'll come off my little arguing Scrum Master yelling at people mode. So I think everybody's been communicated to, and then the future state of this as we move on to what's the next steps when it comes to inclusion or not inclusion or whatever the compromise proposal is, we'll make sure that it's communicated fully to everybody. I will make sure that I have live streams on it to help communicate it to the world too. Since ProgPoW was mostly implemented and tested across multiple clients, it can serve as a deterrent for ASICs to be built at significant scale. ASIC proliferation can go undetected for a long time. Monero's ASIC proliferation. So I'm going to wrap that. So here, let's scroll down. Let's see if there's any more real big points, because I'm going to get into my kind of rebuttal pieces on this. Contentious forks, rebuttals, very clear. Prior pair should be a priority because the focus of all our energy POS. There's 2 different teams for this. So that's a BS statement. There's an ETH2 development team and an ETH1 development team. ETH1 is continuing protocol development. And that's just, there's very little to developers that have worked on or even discussed thoroughly. I agree with that. You rebutted that pretty well. So I don't think that's a thing. Okay, technical. Hudson wrote a damn book on this thing, man. I forgot. It's no longer feasible to mine the algorithm that's truly ASIC resistant. I'm just making sure I didn't. There are coins such as Ravencoin mining experience and ways to create ASIC resistant algorithms. They have not had the level of due diligence that ProgPoW has went through for 2 years and 2 technical audits. That's all I'll say to that. Ravencoin's about to do another iteration of X16 RT with some other content in it, which, I mean, is up for speculation. It will not go through the same level of due diligence and audit that that ProgPoW just went through, and we'll see how successful it is. The last Ravencoin fork lasted for 2 weeks before FPGAs kicked all the GPUs off. RandomX is still out there for speculation. From my experience on it, it looks like it's a pretty good improvement. It hasn't really had a huge proliferation, but it plays very heavy to AMD, one product vendor, offering. So AMD Ryzen processors is really the focus of that. So, you could put sponsored by AMD on the back of that for the tinfoil hat folks. But bottom line, RandomX is really just centralizing it to AMD, which I mean, it's a CPU and it's a lot more able to get. And quite frankly, almost every gamer on the planet these days are switching to Ryzen, so you could play that angle, I guess, from a RandomX standpoint. Fears that the experience about ASIC mining networks pushing GPUs out have been disproven. No, they haven't. So there was about 8 million GPUs on Ethereum's network. If you look at the total wafer count distribution of the E3 and the A10s based on what is public available information, and you do the math on if those were even at 70%, where if only 70% of what was put out was on Ethereum's network, you're still looking at current Ethereum network being over 100 terahashes just for that, right? So you're looking at, I think Ethereum's at like 150 terahashes. So you're looking at maybe up to a third to possibly as high as 2/3 being ASICs on there right now. Just from what was printed if people are using ASICs. Here's the proof in the pudding. You'll see it if the E3s and A10s drop off as expected on April 9th, and we see a pretty significant drop in Ethereum, you're going to get your answer there. So I would say put a pin in that rebuttal in question, and we'll see how much proliferation there was on that network. Let's see here, Dagman, 4 gig. Okay, so most of this conclusion, I'll get to his conclusion. I don't want to skip over his conclusion. and then I'll get to my conclusions of this, and kind of give you guys an idea of where things are sitting in the stack when it comes to champion this EIP further. ProgPoW will cause a network split. So as far as the community is concerned, as it sits right now, there's a strong contention that ProgPoW will create a network split. I think if it was going on tomorrow, it absolutely probably has a high probability of splitting just because of the animosity, because of the chain. So I agree with them there, and I'll come back to that. So I'm not totally skipping over everything here. The role of miners in ProgPoW. I believe GPU miners deserve to be heard more than just service providers. I agree with you, bro, but it doesn't matter, to be honest with you. We're a component in the system. There's been statements out there from people that, oh, we need to be heard. The algorithm can either be participated or not. GPU miners will self-regulate, self-teach, and be part of the ecosystem. Yes or no? It's if you want to offer the opportunity for that level of participation to occur or not. That's what it comes down to. It's not about making people feel good. It's not about any of that. The rules of the road that come with cryptocurrency mining and the ability to participate or not are built in. The incentive is built in to participate. It is not about covering people's feelings. It is business in that sense, right? And I've pushed that out to all the GPU miners, and I've had those discussions. When I talk about educating people of when is a good time to possibly start mining, it's any time. Any time that makes sense for your particular situation. If you're paying 20 cents per kilowatt, probably not a good idea, right? But you could still speculative mine with different currencies to get an understanding on it or not, right? And then maybe at some time in speculative rise, it makes sense for you to kind of join into that community or not. But it's about the ability to participate. So it's not about the role of the miners in ProgPoW or not. It's about ProgPoW is a technically merited algorithm that would allow other people to participate that happen to be GPU miners, right? So it's just spinning that narrative a little bit to understand the context. We are a technocracy, dude, I cannot even say that freaking word, so I'm not even worried about it. The process overcoming, yeah, don't try to understand governance in that. The governance and control of society is industry elite by technical experts. So people that are smart are going to make decisions that make sense for the greater whole at the end of the day, for the English version of that. At the end of the day, it comes down to what is your intentions. It's like a statement of work. Like my day job, I write a lot of technical proposals for statements of work. Bottom line, somebody wants something done, or they want to provide a platform or something, and then people will write proposals to adhere to those requirements and also possibly offer some level of extension and understanding. If Ethereum is going to play the game of being a platform that people can build operations and automation and in financial incentives and other tool sets and stuff, then it comes down to what are those mechanisms that allow that ability to live and thrive within an ecosystem. And then what's the security model that holds that up, and what's the incentives that do that allow a greater participation to have the diversity of participation on that security model. That's what it comes down to. So don't get caught up in like, we're making decisions that, like the requirement is very simple. When it comes to an infrastructure and upholding a network, you're not reinventing a lot of wheels when it comes to the 1.0 ecosystem, right? It's just an algorithm and it's just a payment incentive. Like it's not that much more complex than that. Just don't dork up a lot of the things that cause a lot of the strife, right? And that's why I'm saying that there could be obviously improvement. And I think honestly the answer to that is a lot more communication. Killing people with communication. Where does the community stand today? We're kind of talking through it. My stance on prog proof of work, I'll bring this back up and then we'll switch to my closing statement and I'll take some questions from you guys, so get some added to there. I've always been in favor of whatever the community wanted and never had strong opinion of ProgPoW, if it should be implemented or not. I misjudge the community sentiment. This is a part of the problem, Hudson, if you're trying to take the wisdom of the crowd type of situation, and then when push comes to shove on stuff, it's like the tragedy of the commons, right? Where nobody wants to touch it because they don't have full ownership of it, or they just can't really do it. So it's a mix of wisdom of the crowd meets tragedy of the commons. So you are absolutely entitled to your opinion, and if I was in your position, I completely understand the weight of your signal to noise ratio from people. And I think there's a general, it's a mixed level of general dissent of this entire situation. Some people are like, why are we wasting time on it? Because my mind is here. I don't care about the protocol. Well, then they should be devoid of that conversation, quite frankly, because the influence of ProgPoW or not is not going to affect them when that thing forks if there was no contention on it. At the end of the day, it would do nothing for them when it does not give them a benefit. It does not give them a negative. It is purely an algorithm to allow more participation in that space. It doesn't change any kind of mechanical workings on what they have going on, short of if they pick the wrong fork type of thing. The people that are most affected on it have, I think, been very commenting on it. The DeFi thing, we can have an entire other live stream on to understand like why that would even be a risk. On a point of contention, if those pointers are pointed to the wrong chain and it closes all the positions, absolutely, that's an issue. The idea is that that wouldn't happen because there would be everybody aligning to a direction. So that kind of brings me into the next step of how do we get people to align to the next direction and still protect the network and still allow a lot of participation on it, because turning a blind eye to who supports your network from an infrastructure level is a bad call. It's going to run into a whole bunch of other issues that you just are trying to put a pin in it, and it's not, I mean, it's a bigger issue. You're going to have a lot more bigger issues if you have a centralization of the world. And we're seeing that right now with everything. All right, so and then he has references of everything. So let me go back to my kind of closing statements. I'll cover these and then we'll have some questions. So my kind of closing statement here, final thoughts. See if you guys can see this. Let me blow this up here. So this was a good overview of accurate history, ProgPoW introduction, debate, risk, and issues. I think Hudson, you killed it. Really good review of it. The critical point of contention, E3s and A10s are believed to cease operation on April 9th, 2020. The estimated impact could be up to 40% of the Ethereum network. If this actually occurs, the design decisions by ASIC product vendors were betting on leaning out that they leaned out the ASIC to such a point that it only had 4 gigs of RAM because they had the premonition that Ethereum surely would be transitioned by now to proof of stake. This means the clear and present danger is technically reduced for now, and speculation that FPGAs with ETASH exploits would be taking advantage are the future development of ASICs for memory or daughterboard updates. So those were kind of my points. I'm going to re-explain that in English for you guys can hear it versus me reading it. Bottom line, I think one of the key critical points right now, sitting on when I'm looking at this, is that absolutely it does not make any sense right now, in my opinion, this is coming from a GPU miner, to make a network change right this second. Because you have a pending situation where E3s and A10s look like they're going to fall off the network. I have not got a confirmation that the A10s have fell off ETC. Anybody with an A10 can validate that. That would help us all. Show us some pictures and videos. The E3s are confirmed that they're off. If those fall off on April 9th, then we have a significant portion of Ethereum's network drop off. Then effectively the ASIC issue is off the table for right now. Now, if we're looking and playing forward, I think what it comes down to is what is the future planning? We were already talking Prog Proof of Work as an introduction 3 weeks after Berlin, which is in June. Playing it through to say either an inclusion at least on Robuson's testnet to make sure that the clients are updated, it is deactivated, or we would have it activated on testnet, make sure that everything's tested, give us a place for miners and everybody to test to make sure the integrity of the chain is not hurt, and then put a pin in it to see what the next few months look like. The decision point should not push any change to any testing schedules, inclusion, or any of that. It has been technically merited. We should still have testing done on it. We should still do the due diligence like any other software release to have it ready on a test net. Then at a later time, based on what the situation is, understand that, make sure the entire community understands that the community will move forward with Prog proof of work if there is clear and present danger that we see a massive increase of participation shortly after it by somebody taking advantage of that system. So I have always judged that, the Schelling point on that, I have always judged that if in most efficient mining, because it's the only one I can measure, if I take the most efficient mining setup and I can no longer participate on a network, there's a high chance that something that is better than mining from a GPU standpoint is on that network, influencing the network. In addition, there's another Schelling point on that you can monitor, when that is if a network or a particular card or solution is using a known pool. So if you have a mass majority of that hash power now being in an unknown state straight to an IP, more than likely you have a custom solution. So it is taking a minor checkpoint. I think that needs to be part of this ecosystem. I am willing to take part of that checkpoint and help make sure the communication's out there from the Ethereum community. This is something that happens already with a lot of the mining community out there. Red Panda Mining, this is Voscoin, some of the other mining channels always do checkpoints to see, hey, can I mine this? Can I mine Ethereum right now? What's the participation? What's the value added for somebody with 12 kilowatt per hour or 12 kilowatt per hour cost? You know, we do this on a regular basis as part of the ecosystem, but having a checkpoint to see, is this a real thing? And then raise the flag and understand that it's just not some miner complaining about something, that this is just a checkpoint from a perspective of somebody that mines with GPUs to see on that space. And it all comes back down to not just take care of the GPUs, it's preserving the ability to participate. It's changing the narrative of the discussion. It's not to just take care of miners, it's to give everybody an equal opportunity of participation. That is the difference. So I think that we need to let April get past us. We need to validate that the E3s and the A10s drop off the network. Because as far as we're aware of, those are the only two large companies, Silicon and Bitmain's E3 are the two only development ASICs that are out there, at least in the wild that people know of. So if both of those fall off, we'll see that. And it should be very reciprocal of Ethereum GPU miners are going to be paying attention to the chain at that point. So if you have a huge drop off on there, you're going to see profitability go up, a lot more participation. It's a moot point, quite frankly, at that point in time. It's just more the risk of people taking advantage of those flaws. So I still believe that we should take the due diligence of making sure that the EIP is pushed to at least the test nets and make sure it's integrated with the clients, and this is your poison pill for the space. So that's the actions there. Obviously, this is one of the most debated and technically reviewed open source algorithms to date from a conversation of changing an algorithm, right? If Ethereum does nothing with ProgPoW, let me move this down. The opportunity for another proof of work, broad market participation, seeking cryptocurrency could leverage the due diligence and the investment of ProgPoW. Bottom line, if there's another cryptocurrency out there and you're looking to spin up an algorithm, I do not know why you would not take something that's had as much scrutiny as ProgPoW, because it has the technical definition and merit around it, and the fidelity, the open source, 2 years sitting on a GitHub. You've had a lot of people look at this. It's one of the most tested algorithms when it comes to that level of it, and then you're going to see a lot more participation and testing that comes from the testnet if Ethereum agrees to move forward, at least on the testnet on this. The EIP 1057 needs to move out of draft state. That's the other action that needs to really happen. I am actually taking that, you guys will see that here in a little bit, to help move that along, to be a community steward for that. Regards to Ethereum governments, EIPs are typically proposed from a technical proposal and general solution approach. They act more like a model and design review. So they're first introduced, they have kind of the statement in it, it has kind of a header of what things might be changing. I was suggesting maybe to adjust it to a statement of work type of model, or have at least some kind of concept of structure in there from a statement of work. This allows clear requirements to write a proposition to. The community is not just inheriting solutions for the problem before the problem is fully understood. Bottom line, a lot of engineers are going to make a lot of cool stuff, and they're not necessarily, it's not done from like who needs this sometimes. You have a few people that will bring up issues with like gas price or some kind of calculation stuff that doesn't work. It's kind of like more like a bug. But if you have a situation where we can get to a little more modeling, at least I'm going to try to do that with this, the introduction and executive summary for Prog Proof of Work, a little more in that EIP to have it as more of a statement of work of saying who the audience is intended for when it comes to the ability to participate. Community users being solicited more directly. Proxy product owners assigned to future updates. So this comes down to that community feedback piece of Hudson's discussion when it says community users being solicited more directly, meaning somebody needs, if somebody has a problem on the DeFi, they should have a proxy product owner that can listen and hear the changes that are coming. This is like any other large development team. You're going to have some cross communication. People cannot just sit there and point fingers and use Twitter as your option of communicating. There has to be more of an agreed medium to where proxy product owners know future updates, protocol changes, estimated impact analysis, where they can come and say, how's this going to impact me? Why do I care? Right? This is no different than any production update that's going in. Most community members are just outside participants hoping that it will all go well. Meaning if you are a DApp developer on the Ethereum's network, you do not necessarily have direct contact with the core team, but yet it is the larger community or the larger platform decision makers. Essentially, you're just like, man, I really hope my DApp doesn't break because I really didn't put some cycles on the testnet to validate my stuff worked. So there's just, bottom line, this is a many-to-many participation of events. This isn't one person being a hard fork coordinator having to do to the many people, right? This is a many-to-many equation. What is it meant to be a champion of an EIP? Clear disclosed rules. I'm in actually search for this right now. Notional templates to follow. As a champion, as becoming the champion of EIP 1057, my initial activities will include the following. And this includes if people are feeling like it's still dead to the water, I think it still needs some level of conclusion. So ensuring all clients have what they need for proper integration and associated testing. So there's a sub-punch list of that. Right now I have about 19 items that are part of. Ensuring testnet is updated with 0.93 and community knows how to interact and mine and run the basic interoperability test. Bottom line, the various constituents that could go out there on the network and test things, I want to make sure that there's a clear and concise understanding of where to go, how to test, what miners to use if you're part of that community. In addition, if you're a smart contract producer, being able to go out there and do what you need to do and make sure that that's relevant. Map any dependencies that should be configured and test on testnet for any user training, so UAT, and ensure documentation is up to date and communicated on an appropriate forum. So, I mean, obviously having it on the various Ethereum community forums, but just having it where people can get to it. And with having a channel that has, 40,000 subscribers doesn't hurt. And that's where I'm also going to help try to communicate some of the stuff, which I've done for some of these other EIPs that have nothing to do with miners, by the way, for any of you guys that have been following that aren't really miners but have just discovered me covering this. I used to actually cover a lot of your guys' EIPs to make sure people understood what was coming up from a value proposition level for your appropriate network. And that's just not for Ethereum, it's been for a lot of them. And then take any actions associated back to the participants with technical implementations. Bottom line, if I see something that looks like a gap, I'm going to raise that flag to the participants. So, and then finally, general education on soft forks and hard forks. I think that this needs to be covered. It needs to be covered by everybody that are my fellow crypto currency channel folks, Red Panda Mining, Serpent, all you guys that are in the channel out there, people need to understand on how this stuff works when it comes to hard forks, soft forks, how it makes up. I will help you be able to communicate that information, but we got to get the stigma off of it of just, these are software updates, guys. It should not result in just chain splits. It should not break things as long as people are doing proper due diligent testing. Bad shit happens all the time when people miss things and bugs happen. It's part and parcel of software. but like having an understanding of what's going to create a chain split is I think very, very important. I see a couple super chats. You guys are awesome. Thanks, Serpent and McBreezy, for those $5 super chats. I mean, I take all of any money that comes from this, and I usually roll it back right back into content for you guys. So that's very appreciative. I'll take a few questions. I mean, I talked for a lot. I should have had some water here. Hopefully these things kind of covered. I think the synopsis of Hudson's overall discussion was good. I think it was very historical. Obviously, I disagree that I think it's dead in the water. I think it just comes down to somebody championing it to where it makes sense. I think putting a pin in it till after April makes the most sense, for we can see what happens to the network effect on the ASICs that are on the network, and then we can still build towards a plan of having some kind of inclusion of ProgPoW with it as a sort of Damascus kind of a poison pill kind of concept in the beginning, unless we see a clear and present danger where it makes sense to absolutely activate. But I want to clear the air on the risk of a chain split with people to make sure that they feel comfortable with understanding it. Let's see. I'll take some questions for a few minutes here, and then we'll wrap this up. I mean, we have about 122 watching. I know a few of you guys can ask some questions. I agree we need to do our own part in educating the function of a fork, not as mainly equated to BCH and BTC issues. Correct. Like, there's a technical reason for it, and then there's a chain split, which is literally two people mining on both sides. And it also works in distributed proof of stake and proof of stake and that sort of thing too. If you have validators that don't necessarily agree, and you know they try to challenge you know, the status quo on that, technically you can have somebody try to fork that. It's not as cut and dry though. Oh, was James Hancock in here? I didn't see. James Hop, just giving my appreciation for all the hard work. Oh, that was somebody saying. I don't know. Is there any Ethereum developers in here? Theodore, thanks for that $5, buddy. A10 has 4 gigs of RAM. That is confirmed. They told me that it would be supportive in Acilin. They told me that they were going to do a physical update for A10s costing. We shipped them to send them back with 8 gigabytes. So that could be a thing. That's interesting that they did modularize that for the A10s being able to go up to 8 gig. It makes sense that right now they are probably fabricating some kind of, I'd call it like a stent for that particular ASIC, that they can actually include a daughter card or a daughter board with it. As long as they look in there and say, what do we have to do this? Because most of the time, those memory chips are included on the board itself with the ASIC itself. Nice, James. If there's anything else that I've missed or that I can talk to, I believe on Friday I'm going to be part of your guys' dev call. I'll just set in earnest. If there's any questions, any pre-prep from that, I was going to reach out to the Ethereum development community, the core guys, to see if there's anything that you want me to bring to that meeting specifically. I'm going to work through trying to get the EIP cleaned up right now and get it in preparation. Again, obviously the position I'm going to be pushing for is some level of compromise with regards to a future state, and then I think it's on all of us to start communicating that out to the community on how that would look. I'll continue to create videos around that to help make people have more of a comfort level of where things are at. But I think data serves better than anything out there for people. Some people won't hear it, it's just the way it is. But putting a proverbial pin in it through April, I think is a key step, but that still won't stop my activity of making sure that a testnet's able and working and people can get to it and all that kind of stuff, because I still think that we should pay homage to that. But really waiting for that event post haste on April. For people who don't know, James Hancock is the Ethereum hard fork coordinator, so very helpful for the words, appreciate it. Yep. Currently, ProgPoW has the sediment that it's not happening. Mechanically, it still needs to be gone through of when it would happen, if it could happen. Just because some people's opinions is that it's not going to happen, I think we have enough evidence to see what occurs on the network after April, and then make a more educated decision since ASICs. I mean, they've had 2 years, right? So like part of the risk when this was first proposed is that ASICs were going to take over the network. Part of the understanding I have from most of the community is the fact that a GPU miner can still mine and still be profitable. Granted, a far less amount of GPU miners. The signal to noise for me from people mining Ethereum is a lot lower. Now that is also predicated on $250 Ethereum price, but there's not nearly as many as GPU miners as there used to be on there. And the question is what's the proportion of that? I think that we get our answer in April with that. So what's ETH going to do? So part of that discussion, I think, on part of the discussion will be on the dev call, but I think a lot of the dev call is not going to be obviously ProgPoW. Nobody wants to sit there and talk and rehash a lot of that. I think from my side on the dev call is more of what's the next steps that I'm going to make sure the community around ProgPoW is doing, and that comes to making sure that integration is still good to go, making sure testing and test nets are appropriated, and that we can start doing some testing and have it in that back pocket with the understanding that we're going to get through April and see how the network looks. So it's kind of a hurry up and wait and in a paused standpoint, but taking it to a discussion of pausing the movement forward, which I think will level set everybody's expectation, and then we'll be able to communicate effectively once we have more data on the risk when it comes to ASICs that are out on the network, the proliferation of any kind of exploitation, those sorts of things. We answer those things and we set that expectation for when we get into June and July of what things will really look like. I think we'll give everybody a lot more comfort level, and having me on a voice standpoint and kind of helping you guys, hopefully it gets people a little more confident and comfortable with an execution strategy for that. So we'll see. There's a major FPGA dropping at the end of April. April maybe not as big as an event, well, that will be out. So yes, there's what's that, the Z10 or E10 or V10? I think it's a V10. And that is if there's an FPGA and if it does take advantage of that. Well, we should be able to see some level of telemetry if we see a massive jump. Because it all comes down to, are they going to slow their roll? This is game theory 101, bros. Like if a FPGA is coming out and there's a bit stream in the test bed for that V10 that's coming out, and then they slow roll it to see a dip in April, and then it's all about timing. So if you put those on right before it, you're going to see a blip, and if you put it on right as the blip starts to happen the other way, the negative blip from the E3's falling off, and you have a swap out. If the network says as it is, and then a whole bunch of people come back and say the E3s don't work, then we can pretty much have a pretty high confidence that something got swapped out, and they took advantage of the dip, right? So we'll see. There's some gaming that can go with that. We'll keep a close monitor on that. I think there's some telemetry you can gain from that. It's going to be difficult for them to make it efficient or worth it. Yeah, so if you guys don't have any more questions, I'm going to wrap this one up. Put your comments below, like, share, subscribe, share this out to some folks. Hopefully it gave some level of clarity from the position of the GPUs and where folks are setting, the rationale for the participation. I think it paid homage to some of Hudson's comments. I think some of them were very good. You guys heard through what I covered, some of the rebuttal pieces. And again, this is just me sitting in, like, who's this guy? It's me sitting in the space from mining from 2011 and being part of this ecosystem and having that interaction with you guys, over 4+ million views of going back and forth, 300+ videos of which over 180 have been live streams with you guys. I feel very in tune with at least the approach, benefit, and process of the mining ecosystem, right? So there's just a huge organic growth out there that people just don't realize of being able to participate or not. And I think it's critical to understand that perspective. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap this up. Thanks for watching, and we'll see what's coming up. I've been trying to do some actually testing, but I'm going to get through the EIP cleanup and then we'll get back, once the test nets are set up or they're configured where I can get out there with 0.93, I'm going to start doing some live testing with some of the cards, and we can try 0.93 testing back on the new Ethereum testnet. All right. Thanks for the likes and shares, and I will catch you guys later.